right, it's become some sort of a tradition here in Davos that we actually start all our interactions with the Bajaj family. And joining me right here is Sanjeev Bajaj, uh, himself becoming a Davos veteran of sorts, aren't you, Sanjeev? But the Davos summit is happening at a time when a lot of people believe that global growth has peaked, and the figures could be revised downwards as far as global growth is concerned. It's happening at a time when there are global uncertainties in terms of trade tension and all of that. How do you believe the global economy is placed, and where is India amidst it all to begin with? Let's set the context first.
So it's great to be here once again, Supriya. I think we are both becoming veterans over here. I don't know if that's good or bad. Um, the focus again this year is once again on what's called the fourth industrial revolutions, right? It's the digital world, it's the interconnected world, and we know today the world is increasingly polarized, but all the more reason that there's a greater need for dialogue. There's a dialogue to try and understand what's common. The dialogue is necessary to try and iron out differences. And I think nothing is more important than to get people to come together and discuss. And that's what Davos is about.
Fair point, indeed. And I think discussion is very important when temperatures are soaring high and the US and China are, engaged in some sort of a big trade war. But the reality also is that globalization in an era of industrial revolution 4.0, which is all about digitization, which is all about the digital economy, where tech disruptions are happening. How different will this wave of globalization, hopefully it's going to stay here, be than the last wave when there was a lot of trade that was going on in the world?
I believe that's a developing story. Nobody clearly has the answer to that. On one hand, we've all grown up in a market economy, especially, and in a globalized economy, especially after the Second World War. So nearly 70 years of that. And overall, the world has gained. Unfortunately, it's not gained equally. And I think that's what you're seeing right now. You're seeing the people who've grown significantly less than others to say that you need to carry us with you as well. And I think that's a very important point. What the digital economy does is it allows for very low cost delivery of all kinds of products and services to the last customer, which you couldn't do earlier. It was far too expensive. And I think the digital economy hence makes the whole process far more inclusive. That's the opportunity that's there. And that's why I'm very positive of how this whole story is going to uncover, but we have to wait and watch.
Indeed, we have to. And as far as India is concerned, I think all eyes are on the big election, the big battle of 2019. But as the government steps into the electoral zone, and obviously, there will be a lot of election rhetoric that's going to be in the making. As one of the tallest captains of Indian industry, and somebody who, runs a very thriving business, what has been your assessment of this government? In the last 5 years, what would you believe were the big achievements, and where could more work have been done? What were the laggards?
So I'll take the tallest literally, that I can accept. Otherwise, there are much greater captains of industry there. Um, what's important for a country like ours is to have a decisive government and one that's inclusive as well, and one that can get things done. To that extent, this government has got a number of things done. On the other hand, there's still rhetoric, and there are issues which should have not happened. We need to be inclusive. We live in a kind of country where whether you want to be or not, it has to be an inclusive way to move ahead. I mean, the world is telling us that in different ways. It could be economically inclusive, it could be socially inclusive, it could be religiously. I'm not getting into those levels of detail. I think that's very important. The second is that because we work in a federal structure, we have to have a way for the center and the states to work together. And I'm not here to take names or blame one side or the other, but the question is if all of it doesn't work together, the country does not progress. Despite all this, I think what we have seen with the insolvency code, the bankruptcy resolution, the way Aadhaar has grown, there is a lot of there's a tremendous progress that has happened as well over the last 4 or 5 years. I just think that we want more. We want to go from 7 to 9 to 10% double-digit growth, and that's possible.
They always say in India that ye dil mange more. But Sanjeev, I think one of the things that I want to specifically speak to you about, because you've got exposure to spaces like this, and from a big picture point of view, have agriculture and jobs been the two issues where not just the rest of us, but Indian industry would have wanted a lot more to happen? And do you believe these will be the two big issues of the election as well?
They could be. They could be, but let's also not forget that there's a very large urban, young, educated middle class, which is also driving elections. Their aspirations need to be met as well. So it's as much about rural as it is about urban now going forward. So you need to take a look at both these issues.
You know, as somebody who understands numbers and, you know, budgets and fisc and all of that, there is a lot of chatter about how India's fisc could expand, and will that be a good thing or a bad thing is another debate. But, you know, the government so far has been remarkably restrained in going populist. Do you believe they're going to give in to that temptation, given this is an election year and there is some buzz about a agri relief package? Do you believe the markets will understand, like the finance minister says, that it's a rational and not a populist move? I mean, will that be easy to decipher?
You know, this is always tempting to do, right? And expanding budgetary deficits is something that's happening world over. So we're just in that phase. Election time clearly ends up being a tempting time.
Right.
And we've always seen in past elections also, there is some amount of expansion that takes place, there's some populist moves that takes place. But I think beyond that, one has to get to some fiscal discipline. And that's a balance. I'm not an economist, and I think nobody can tell you what that balance is. I think that is something that we have to leave the finance ministry and RBI through the various fiscal and monetary measures to be able to do that. But what I will say is that going ahead, if India has to come to close to double-digit growth, we need a lot of reform in the financial sector. Today, there's only one type of bank license, whether you call it as SFB or otherwise, they're all universal bank licenses, by and large. 95% of things are common. Now, if somebody says, I want to set up a digital bank, just for 100,000 customers, but a very low cost and only for those that are digitally enabled. But I don't want a PSL what do you call responsibility.
That's right, yes.
I think we should be willing to do that. Somebody else says that, you know, I'm going to set up something just in a neighborhood. I mean, cooperative banks and others were something, but they failed. I'm talking now through private sector involvement. And at the same time, I can understand that the RBI is worried on fit and proper. Make it public, have the right set of guidelines. And if somebody doesn't meet that, they don't meet that. But don't stop everybody else.
So don't have a one rule, one size that fits all kind of a thing. But, you know, Sanjeev, I think it's a very important point that you talk about. You know, banks is just one space. But you're somebody who's largely unscathed. And, you know, by the whole NBFC crisis and all of that, there is a lot of debate on, you know, liquidity and things like that. We'll talk in just a bit. But what are the key lessons that do you believe you want to share? Because there was a lot of scare as far as NBFCs were concerned. People thought, you know, they're going to let down the markets. People thought the contagion could have spread. But coming from someone who was largely unscathed, and what lessons would you share?
See, there are two different issues. One was there were a bunch of less than NBFCs, I think HFCs, that were mismatched on funds. So they got caught at the wrong end. They had short-term liabilities. They didn't have the assets. Clearly, if you have to grow, you have to match your assets to your liabilities. That's one of the first things you learn, whether you're an NBFC or a bank. So this is something that requires correction, and RBI has taken some steps towards that. The second is the larger issue. Why did all NBFCs, HFCs fall in value by between 20 and 40% in a matter of a few days?
Absolutely.
I think this is systemic risk. Today, the top 10 NBFCs in the country each have AUMs of over 10,000 crore, and they are responsible for 30% of incremental credit going into the system. Consumer growth in this economy, SME growth in this economy has been because of NBFCs. Hence, you need to find a way to ring fence them. It doesn't mean that you're going to create the wrong incentives. But why didn't banks fall? Because everybody knows that a bank license is a secure license under RBI. RBI will open up a window for liquidity. Why don't you do that for the big NBFCs? And you get them to
So what
set
would your
aside some
prescription be
funds.
for the big NBFCs? You mean tighter ALMs? I mean, what would you entail
I would
here?
say tighter ALMs, but at the same time, RBI opens up a liquidity window. It will probably never get used. But it prevents these kind of shocks in the economy. And what you have to keep in mind is, if you look at most of their NBFC stock, most of them have recovered. So somebody lost a lot of money for no reason at all in the middle.
No, absolutely. But, you know, Sanjeev, I think on the liquidity front, and I want to touch upon that before I move forward, there was so much of clamor for liquidity, and many people thought, is it fine to open the spigots of lending right now? Is this going to stoke inflation? Inflation is by and large under control. Do you believe this is the time when RBI needs to look at a special window, or do you believe the worst is behind us and we don't need to do that right now?
No, so that situation is past.
Okay.
Yeah, so
But
we
this
don't
needs
we
to be a
don't
more
need.
structural sort of reform.
I think they need to think of this more structurally, because what's an NBFC? It's again a license to lend with some limitations.
Yes.
Bank is the same. There's some differences. Why should NBFCs be associated with shadow banking?
True.
What's shadow about it? It's real banking. I think this is where some fundamental thinking and rethinking is required.
As somebody who also has a lot of exposure to the consumer side of the economy, and the one thing that's said about the Indian economy is that it's a one engine sort of an economy. It grows only on consumption and all of that. What are the trends you are seeing? I mean, is consumption picking up? Is there some discerning spending that's back in the market?
Clearly, we see a pickup. To get more textured information, after me, you should catch Rajiv Jain, who's the MD of Bajaj Finance,
Yes.
and he's here.
Yes.
I'm sure he can tell you a lot more. But we are seeing that improving.
And what about the, there is some amount of debate on high growth in retail lending, and unsecured lending. Could that be leading to another asset bubble? Is that something that concerns you? Are you bothered about that just yet?
Again, when you look at it from a larger perspective, the opportunity is huge, and on average, the consumer is significantly at low leverage. But there could always be pockets, or there could be particular NBFCs who are taking on higher risk. The question is, are they pricing that higher risk? Are they then is that getting priced in the money that is being lent to them? So when you go down to a macro level, this needs to be dealt at the macro issue. But there is a larger opportunity. As you said, with Bajaj Finance, over the last 10 years, we are doing this. But because we are focused on the long term, we are focused on building the right risk metrics before we lend. And we keep reviewing that on a continuous basis.
So talking about one risk metric is that you've slowed down the loan against property book. Is that a segment that you're wary of? Is that a segment that you believe poses threat and risk?
We were 2 years ago, so we slowed it down for 2 years. So between 2016 and 18, FY, the book didn't grow. We've just started growing it last year. So, or let's say this year. So this financial year, the book has started growing. The lab book now, the incremental book sits in our new home loan company, home finance company called Bajaj Housing Finance. Um, we are growing, we are lending month on month. We are being a little cautious just to see the external environment on liquidity. As I said, the worst is behind us, but does it pick up? So we want to be careful over there, not because we are seeing higher risk on the ground, but we just want to make sure the last liquidity event just settles down and passes by.
A quick word on life insurance before I move back to the big picture. How has that is that business doing? April to December outlook was good. Is that a segment that you think is here to stay in terms of robustness?
So life insurance clearly has evolved into pure protection of life, but far more importantly into both an investment product and a protection product. And that is because outside of the big cities, mutual funds are still low on penetration. Also, a ULIP is a fairly simple product, which gives you a little bit of both. But of course, goes without saying that you have to explain it correctly to the customer. We are very bullish. We've transformed our business about 3 years ago, and from there we are showing steady growth in the overall top line, in the product mix, as well as in the productivity across our different channels. So that's growing well.
Life and general insurance, and I think I can't not ask you this question on your business. Any plans to list one of the two JVs?
No, Supriya, because we don't need to at this stage. Now, if you ask me, will you ever list? There's no
Never say
reason.
never.
Yeah, it's never say never, but there has to be a trigger for it. The businesses are profitable. They're very well capitalized. Both Allianz and Bajaj are very confident about the businesses, both the businesses, and both want to stay invested at this point of time. So there's no need to do that in the short term. Let's see thereafter.
So a quick back to elections and back to polity in India as we speak here in Davos. There is this sense of fear when you speak to a lot of investors and Indian industry as well. What if it's a fractured mandate? What if it is a strong, decisive government? Does one necessarily need to fear coalitions? Because coalitions in the past haven't been bad for the reform trajectory, so to say.
Well, a decisive government clearly is a more stable government than a coalition. But as you've said, we've seen coalitions in the past also, which have done reasonably well. So let's put it this way: decisive clearly ahead of a coalition. But whether one or the other, we want one that will stay 5 years and that will keep focusing on what's right moving forward.
But are you confident, and this is the last question really, that irrespective of the next government that forms, whether it's going to be this government that gets voted back or any other coalition that we see in the making, the reform trajectory, so to say, is perhaps going to move in one direction? Are you confident about that?
I very much hope so because I see the benefits of that. And I think a large number of Indians have seen the benefit of that in the last 4 years.
On a lighter vein, because we're in Davos and it allows us some humor and some insights, all of us are constantly on technology. We're either on our phones or on our iPads and everything. Do you have a digital detox sort of a day that you do in a week or a month?
You know, in my case, I'm hardly ever speaking on my phone. So I drive it the way I'm comfortable. Of course, I'm on message, I'm on email, but I've not felt the need to detox.
Do you still put your phone next to your bed when you sleep, or is it in the other room?
No, so it's next to my bed, but it's off.
That's a wise thing to do. Thank you very much, Sanjeev Bajaj, for speaking to us.